fixated on the left tackle situation, which you alluded to earlier, that you're not sure what the plan is here. And that's what, in my opinion, has gotten the Bears in trouble. I don't know if they've got a solution in the building. I like Braxton Jones, the person. I don't love him as a player. I don't know about Karan Amagaji, if he's ready or if he can play left tackle. And then there's Darnell Wright, which they kept the door open to, possibly moving him. Do you believe that could be the solution? What surprised you, and what were some of the moves that you're like, okay, I totally understand this?
I think I understand them not getting the running backs they wanted early on, day one and day two, because they weren't able to make the trades, whether the cost was prohibited, meaning Ashton Genty in the first round, or where they were in the second round with, they're just like the options that were there, like went before them. And I know that Pat and I were talking about this on the podcast on Friday morning. And he was a little surprised that my thought was that they were going to have to trade up if they wanted to get Quinshon Judkins or Travion Henderson, and that just wasn't a possibility. The order, I think most people thought Henderson would go first, the two Ohio State backs, but nonetheless, there wasn't the option to do that. I don't think there were any sellers, willing to move on from those picks. Certainly New England wasn't one of them. They're right before the Bears. So, that was probably the only surprise as far as, what they weren't able to get done, which was a priority, and I think still is a priority. But, the only real head scratcher, and I'm sure the guy is a good player, but like getting Ruben Hippolyte where they did on day 3, when this was a prospect that most people had on their boards as an undrafted free agent, college free agent guy they could go after, once the draft wrapped up, was just a little surprised. That one was probably the only one I say was a big reach. But overall, I think Mel Kiper's grade of a B+. I've seen a couple others that are around a B, B-. I think that's all solid. I think it's fair. Where the board fell on Thursday didn't give them a chance to get one of the top tackles. So their next best option, when they had Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren stacked on top of each other, was to get one of those tight ends, and they did, and it makes the offense better. And they have some luxury picks on there with a tight end and with a wide receiver, but Ben Johnson is somebody they believe is a really good play caller and is going to be able to get these guys the ball in ways that the last staff was not able to.
It's really fun to play the what-if game. So I would ask you, Courtney, what if Banks was not taken at 10, and what if Henderson was not taken at 37? Do you think that, in a different world, we could be talking about them drafting an offensive tackle and a running back?
Absolutely. I know they like Calvin Banks a lot. I think if he was there at 10, if the Saints went defense, that would have been the left tackle of the future, period. And I think the same thing with Henderson. They really like his pass blocking ability. He's a threat in the receiving game. He is more of the Jahmyr Gibbs type that you would be able to put into the backfield with DeAndre Swift. I think there's still questions there, certainly at both positions. Like, there's no clear answer as to what the succession plan is at left tackle right now, who the number 2 or number 1A, whatever it is going to be in the backfield. But they have options there. I just don't know. I think if the board were to fall in that way, Waddle, they would have gone and taken both of those players if they were there.
Before we get to the tackle conversation, you mentioned you got DeAndre Swift, you got Roschon Johnson, you also, who's the kid that Ian Wheeler? I don't know how they feel about him. Would you keep an eye on maybe a veteran that could be let go between now and the start of this season? Do you think that's a path they may look to at the running back spot, or you think they're set with who they have?
Yeah, I know there's some buzz going out there today about Nick Chubb because he is a free agent. Does not sound from the way that Andrew Berry, politically, in a politically correct way, talked about it without saying, yeah, we don't need him anymore because we got Quinshon Judkins and our backfield is set with the guys that we drafted. But it doesn't feel like he's going back to Cleveland. Now, how healthy is he? You remember he's coming off a year with a really gruesome knee injury that he had to recover from, and then he broke his foot last year against Kansas City. So there's 2 injuries that I think at 29 years old you're mindful of. But it wouldn't surprise me if they look to sign another vet at some point, in the summer, some point, maybe around the time of training camp, just to have more bodies in for competition, because They didn't really get an accurate read last year on Roschon Johnson. They were high on him, obviously, when they drafted him. I mean, they're calling him the pillar, could be a pillar of the franchise. He's a fourth-round pick. Early on, trying to figure out his usage in 23 and then 24, after they started feeling pretty positive about him, I feel like they couldn't get a read on him. And that's fair because, he's on the field on early downs. He's off the field on third downs. Are you only using him in short yardage situations? I don't think they figured out what his identity is yet, and they're not going to punt on that experiment because it's too early. And he's a very talented player, clearly, in the eyes of Ryan Poles and the staff. But I still think they could use some depth in that running, in the backfield. It's possible that, the seventh-round pick from Rutgers, Kyle Monagai, I believe how you pronounce his last name. I think he's, somebody that they clearly felt could have gone earlier in the draft, and they were glad to round out the draft class with a running back. But it doesn't have the same sort of home run feel as it would have if they would have gotten, they took themselves out of the third round to be able to get the extra the 2 second-round picks and the moves they made on Thursday. So no Caleb Johnson, no anybody else that could have gone when 6 backs are off the board and you're going into the final day. Your options are kind of limited. So I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if it'll be Nick Chubb, but I would not be surprised if they add another veteran back here at some point.
Yeah, I am very fixated on the left tackle situation. What you alluded to earlier, that you're not sure what the plan is here. And that's what, in my opinion, has gotten the Bears in trouble. Oh, with these amount of guys, someone will step up and fill it and solve it. I don't know if they've got a solution in the building. I like Braxton Jones, the person. I don't love him as a player. I don't know about Karan Amagaji, if he's ready or if he can play left tackle. Trapillo is mostly a right tackle. Matt Miller told us he loves him as a right tackle, not as a left tackle. And then there's Darnell Wright, which they kept the door open to, possibly moving him. Do you believe that could be the solution?
Do I personally think that's the right solution? No, but that's my personal belief, and they're not asking me to, that's Dan Rochar's job. He's their offensive line evaluator. I don't think you draft players who had played a position so long ago in their career, were cemented at one position in college, play them at that position for a couple of years in the NFL, and then say, all right, let's move you back to left tackle. I don't think that's the right solution, but that is an option that they have on the table, knowing that Braxton Jones is hurt right now or he's recovering from injury. He's not going to be ready anytime soon, hopefully at some point in training camp, and that Karan Amagaji's, he can't go in uncontested. That would be ridiculous. So I'm not surprised that Ryan Poles left that on the table, knowing that Darnell Wright can play both. Now, can he play both well in the NFL? I mean, yeah, you do go against NFL edge rushers in the SEC, but he hasn't played left tackle in a couple of years. So I have caution about that. And I don't think that that's wrong for any Bears fan to look at that and say, I don't know, does he really want to do that? But Trapillo has 36 starts under his belt, with most of them coming at right tackle the last couple of years. He's 6'8", got 33-inch arms. He's talked about, his size being an advantage, but also knowing that sometimes he plays a little high. Braxton Jones has talked about the same thing throughout the last 3 years, and how that's, been an impediment at times to, his play style, being able to handle a bull rush. I don't know if you run into the same thing if you were to put him in the competition at left. So maybe they feel his best path to winning a spot is at right tackle. So all of a sudden, coming out of day 2, we're looking at the depth chart, and you just try to figure out where the position competition is going to be the most intense going into training camp. Right now, it's projecting that left and right tackle is going to be where all your eyes are when you're out at Hallis Hall watching training camp practices to see what the combinations are, who's lining up where, how many reps are they taking. And one thing Poles, I think this is in what he said about Darnell Wright, you can play both, and that they're going to, leave the door open more or less. I get the sense that the Bears, if they do this, they want to have an answer sooner rather than later. They don't want to put, these guys in a situation where it's 2 weeks before training camp. They've seen them before training camp ends. They've seen them in a couple preseason games. Okay, let's move somebody back to a spot where they either hadn't taken any reps all preseason or hadn't been there in a while. I don't think they want to be playing musical chairs with it. So if they're going to do it, they have to commit to it, and they know that because they've done it before where they haven't. They've moved guys around and it hasn't worked.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. I want them to build chemistry and still not know a couple weeks before the season starts. And to build on that, Courtney, there's a lot that could happen. So we'll let it all unfold. But when you have the number 56 overall pick, and especially after you traded down from the 41st overall pick with the Bills, when you draft a guy at 56, my expectation, and I think most fans are like this, is that's got to be a foundation piece on your team. And when you even though Burden may not be a starter, we know Burden's going to get lots of snaps and lots of opportunities. It doesn't work that way with offensive linemen. If Trapillo isn't starting, he's basically not playing. And to me, if he's not a starter, if you're going to keep Darnell Wright at right, and he's not good enough to play left, why are you drafting an offensive lineman that can't start?
I agree with you, because the third round, let's say Karana Magaji it just doesn't pan out. He can be a great backup, but you don't trust him to be a starting left tackle. I think that's okay because he's a third-round pick. That's where you can find swing tackles and not feel like you missed out on a draft pick. But a second-round pick, especially what they did on Friday to be able to accumulate the extra draft capital and moving around there to have 3 by the end of the night and, giving up in round 3, that's got to be somebody who starts. It will be – I don't want to call it a failure because obviously certain different circumstances sometimes take place. It will not be good if he doesn't win a starting job. Then they missed on. Then that's an early sign that they missed on the pick. Now, could he eventually? Sure, but if you're spending a second round pick at that position, that should in theory be a starter for this year, and it should in theory line up with your plan. Otherwise, you don't toy with the idea of moving Darnell Wright out of his position. You don't draft a right tackle if you're not confident that Darnell Wright can handle playing the left side of the offensive line. You just don't do it because it makes no sense, because then you have a surplus at a position and you're not helping the roster out if you're having that guy on the bench. It's too high of draft capital to be spent on a swing tackle. Swing tackle at worst, maybe for his first season, but that's got to be somebody who projects as a day one starter or close to it by the time we get through the month of August.
Courtney, how did you interpret what Ben Johnson had to say with regard to competition and maybe the bringing in of Burden and Loveland and how that impacts maybe, DJ Moore and Cole Kmet?
The whole idea, I think the term that's been used a lot with Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson, from us asking them, you've got a lot of mouths to feed on offense. They did last year, and it didn't work out because the play caller couldn't figure out how to get the ball to the players that he needed to. That's why Cole Kmet disappeared and his usage took, a nosedive. That's why, I go back to the Roschon Johnson thing. There's no reason he should have been off the field on some of these third downs in the early part of the season. I think that the way that they feel about Ben Johnson is that it's not just, calling plays is not just a science. There's an emotional feel to it. There's an emotional feel to keeping your guys involved, even if they're, 1 week it might be a heavy Colston Loveland game. The next week it might be a heavy Luther Burden game. The one thing I'm curious about, both of them line up in the slot a lot. So they're going to be taking targets away from each other if you're just thinking about this in actuality. How does Ben Johnson keep them both engaged as rookies? How does he keep DJ Moore involved, engaged, all of that? For as talented as DJ is, there were moments last year where his body language was getting questioned because the targets either weren't coming his way or the quarterback play wasn't he was having an off day, whatever it was. A play caller who's got the right pulse on the team is going to be able to alleviate not all, but some of those problems by the way he keeps guys involved and locked in. So I think that the confidence that Ryan Poles has in Ben Johnson is reflected in the way that he talks about Ben. You guys have probably noticed this from the press conferences. I found it interesting when Jeff King, who's our senior director of player personnel, was talking about Colston Loveland on Friday, immediately after he was drafted, talking about this is I'm paraphrasing. I don't have it right in front of me, but he talked about how Loveland is a type of player that allows Ben to do the creative things he wants to do in the offense. And Ryan Poles echoed that, talking about these are the things that, will help Ben be able to do his job. I just find it interesting. We never talked about Matt Eberflus that way. I think it shows you just how involved Ben Johnson was in getting his players to fit his scheme and maybe in a way that Flus wasn't. I'm sure, Tremaine Edmonds was like the big pickup in free agency a couple years ago. He was supposed to be the Shaq Leonard of Flus's defense, and that's fine, and it worked for some things. Obviously, he took a step back, but like just the way that they talk about Ben Johnson, we got this player for Ben to basically cook. And that's not what you heard about Flus. And obviously on the offensive side of the ball, it dictates things. It dictates what the defense is going to do. They have to react to that. But I just find the rhetoric different than it's been around anybody, other coaches that I've covered here. So take with that what you will, but that was kind of how I read into it, of just how they think Ben Johnson can adequately and appropriately use the talent around him that they got for him.
Courtney